started with we got a couple. We would order nucleosides. That the Japanese had kindly provided from salmon sperm DNA. They had hydrolyzed the DNA. There were, I don't know, all the providers were Japanese. I'm not sure, so they had the most salmon sperm or what. But we would get these little bottles of like 25 grams of the Tennessee or 25 grams of thymine from the Japanese, and then we would have to take chemically the little molecules and add various reactions. I mean, it was because we're organic chemists. I don't have any slides describing it, but the organic chemistry was straightforward, but it's hard to describe. You had to stick little reactive groups on one end and blocking groups on the other end, and then you take two nucleosides and you stick them together to make like a T and an A and make TA, and then you take two of those together, like two dimers, and make some particular tetramer, and then you make a hexamer out of the tetramer. You just keep, this is a block synthesis. You sort of building up the sequence, and at each step you have to purify the intermediates, because the reactions that we were using in 1983 were not really, they weren't like 99% effective. The reactions that people later developed, in fact, in those, during the very early 80s, the chemists, the real chemists, finally got involved in oligonucleotide synthesis. Originally, when oligonucleotides started being synthesized, it was done by molecular biologists. And molecular biologists didn't really have any feeling for, like, well, how do you do something in the absence of air or water? I mean, how do you do reactions that way? So the reactions that turned out to be the most effective for making oligonucleotides worked better. And they didn't work at all in the presence of water, and air wasn't very good. So the chemistry that evolved finally was taken over by, it was done by the real chemists, not the molecular biologists who just needed oligonucleotides. It took the real chemists a while to figure out these things are kind of important, we should make them. And we should do it for the molecular biologists rather than have them make it themselves, because they're pretty sloppy candidates. Because they like things to be solid in water. So in our lab, we were using the techniques that we had learned from the molecular biology. I was an organic chemist who could have learned the new methods, and we had started doing that, in fact. The ones that they now use something called phosphoramidite chemistry, where the phosphorus is a +3 phosphorus, and it's much more reactive than what we were using, which was the original kind of hand-me-down from the old molecular biologists who first made them, which was using phosphorus from the 5 valence. It's much less reactive. The difference is very important if you're trying to do the synthesis in a sequential way. Like you start off with the first base stuck to a solid support, and then you start adding them one at a time to it, which is the kind of thing you could do with a machine. In other words, it was really, eventually there were machines where you just type in the sequence, and you keep it filled with the reagents, and you walk away, and every 24 hours or quicker, it would synthesize an oligonucleotide. The first machine that I got in my hands that worked like that was made by somebody named Ron Cook. And Ron and I had a long history together. Earlier, we had been peptide chemists at the University of California in San Francisco. And we were sitting in a seminar one afternoon, and there were lots of peptides to synthesize for medicinal purposes. We were sitting in the seminar, and this guy, Roberto Crea, was giving a seminar from this newly formed little biotech company called Genética. And he was an oligonucleotide chemist. And the lecture was about the fact that they had made a 40 base long oligonucleotide. They had stuck it into a plasmid called PBR322, which is like the sort of workhorse for a lot of cloning back then. And they had stuck that plasmid into a bacteria, and bacteria had taken the sequence of the oligonucleotide and turned it into a peptide. And it's like a miraculous vision for us to look at this. My God, you made peptides by making the oligonucleotide and sticking it in bacteria that was going to take our place in the world. So we better stop being peptide chemistry. We should be oligonucleotide chemistry. Ron and I both had the same idea. Ron he kept his day job there at the med center, but he started working at night on a machine that would do the process. And he came up with the first useful oligonucleotide synthesis machine. I quit my job and took a job at CETUS doing the process of oligonucleotide synthesis by hand. And so I had been working there probably about 2 years. And the process was getting faster and faster, but it was very slow. It was kind of fun. It was 7 of us in the lab, and we just had the list of oligonucleotides and synthesized. But one day, Ron came walking in with this machine. He said, "I got it. It works." And so he gave me one. Our lab at CETUS, a copy of it. He took one to this guy named Matucci at Genética, and then he took one home himself. And then we all three together sort of worked out how you would go about making the thing actually make oligonucleotides. It took about 2 months. But suddenly, we had a machine in our lab that could make a 20 base long oligonucleotide overnight. It didn't take breaks. It didn't need coffee. It just needed the reagents, and it needed one person to run it. And I had a group of 7 people. And I was thinking, well, including me, I thought, well, I just need to use a machine now. And this is not the government. This is a private corporation trying to make profit. So I have to eventually tell the management that we got more people than we need. And they were all my friends. And I thought, well, let's see, what else can I do about this thing? And it occurred to me that the only other possible thing to do is like either retool the lab to do something else, or to figure out something useful that you can do with oligonucleotides besides what we use, what we already did. And it never occurred to me that I was about to do something that raised the demand for oligonucleotides by about 1 million fold. That can have about 20%, 30%, anything higher to get the management off my back there. But it really, PCR raised the need for oligonucleotide by about 1 million fold. And that was my purpose of doing it. I mean, it did have other uses in the world besides just keeping my people employed. But that was sort of the unusual reason why I was looking for. I was looking for anything you could. I said, these things are so cute. They're little pieces of DNA, and they ought to be useful for something. And there was a project at CETUS that was involved with trying to diagnose sickle cell anemia in a fetus. Say, does this person have the wild type gene, little fetus, or does it have like the heterozygous, or does it have the sickle type homozygous? If it has sickle type homozygous, and you allow it to be born, it's going to have a rotten life, and it ain't going to last very long. And there was a lot, of course, there was plenty of religious kind of reasons to not abort a kid that was going to have a horrible life, but there are lots of heathens in America that would be willing to do it if the kid was going to have a really bad life. And so it was an important project. The problem with it is that the woman would come into it like a clinic, pregnant, and she had a history of like having, I mean, they couldn't do PCR on her, but they knew that she had a history of sickle cell anemia in the family. And so they would take us, they would take a sample of the placenta, like amniocentesis is what they call it, and then the lady would go home, and it would be about a month while they processed it. I mean, and that was full speed. That was with the whole lab was devoted to it. To take that sample, at that point, what you'd have to do is you'd have to take the DNA from the amniocentesis. You'd have to stick it into, you have to clone it, put the DNA, clone the DNA that was coded for beta globin you'd have to isolate that clone. You did a lot of molecular biological procedures that took time. Some had to do with growing the clones up, and they were cumbersome to do. And so it would probably be about a month before the doctor would have this really rotten looking from it. It's like the data at the end was never nice and clean. And you were making a life or death situation for the field. I always felt pretty bad about it because they've got this really fuzzy looking electrophotogram that maybe it's a homozygous, maybe it's a heterozygous, maybe it's not even, at all sickle. It's not, it was real hard looking at those things. They were very noisy. And it had taken a month to get that data. And I thought it would be really good for a hospital if they had a 24-hour answer, and the answer came out absolutely yes or absolutely no. There was no looking and staring at these things for hours in the light box and trying to figure out what they meant. So I thought, well, this is a good place. Maybe we can use oligonucleotides in some way to make that call. And at that point, DNA sequencing, like dideoxy sequencing, it had been around since, this is about 1982 or something like that. And this would have been sequencing, dideoxy sequencing, about 75 or somewhere around that. So it was doable, but the way that it was doable involved fairly sophisticated techniques in terms of what was a hospital lab at that point. The things that in a research lab